Well, hello guys. Hope everybody's doing alrighty. All right. Today we're going to talk about what happens after the Renaissance, which is the Baroque and the Rococo. This PowerPoint is actually fairly short, so it should not take us too long to go through it, which is the opposite of the previous one, which we had quite a bit to discuss. Anyways, so this is the last thing we saw from the last video. We were talking about how all of this imagery here are basically spot on for the Renaissance. We're looking at knowledge, and also we have right here Paul preaching in Athens, right? So all of those things, the fact that he's preaching, and as well the fact that he's in Athens, that's a connection to knowledge. And then we have the church. Obviously, it's Paul, so it's Christian related. We have the Pope himself here as well, learning. Also much so related to that. We also have 1 point perspective. Everything in here by Raphael, it's about the Renaissance. Now, as we continue moving into time, okay, we get into a slightly darker era, literally and figuratively. As you have, as we talked about before, the Protestant movement has been growing, and the reason why the Protestants are expanding is because a lot of people do not agree with the way that basically the Catholic Church is being run. So the Catholic Church is all about acquiring money, acquiring favors. They are as much part of the ruling system as the rulers themselves. There's a plethora of things going on in which a lot of believers do not feel that the Catholic Church was being true to its own teachings in so many ways. So that's what gave a lot of power to the Protestant system, or to the Protestant Church. Anyways, as the Catholic Church is seeing this lost in faith, let's say in the Catholic Church, then they started to really winding down or making much harder rules and regulations within the church and what can be couldn't done. So this is a time period where you're going to start seeing crusades and the knights and this kind of purification of religion once again. So it's the pendulum going back the other direction. We had kind of a loosening up of kind of the grip of the church, and then all of a sudden now we have the opposite direction. Now, artistically and aesthetically, some of the things you will see that are tied to this new wave of restrictions, put it that way, the art and the imagery is going to be a lot more dramatic visually. You're going to see that artworks are not going to be so Greek in regards to control emotions and things like that, but rather the opposite. We're going to have a lot of emotion being portrayed. We're going to see this need for creating things that create a sense of awe and wonderment visually. And the other thing that we're going to be seeing in this case is that now that we understand visually how to portray depth in a flat space, right? We have very good understanding of perspective. Artists are going to be really pushing the limits of what you can do with perspective. So on regards to the exploration of space, you're going to be seeing a lot of foreshortening, this way of treating visually the subject to where things are really seem to be really up close and then go further into space in a very kind of fast visual manner. And that'll make sense in a little bit. Another thing we're going to see, and this is a complementation to this idea of drama, emotion, and splendor, is the exploration of values. So if we look back, for example, at Raphael's piece right here, right? If we look at this piece right here, everything seems to be bathed by the same amount of light. It's almost as if there was some kind of I don't know, all kinds of lights kind of shining on this so that we can see everything perfectly. We can see the background, we can see what's on the all the way in the distance, we can see what's happening inside this building and inside that building, and we can see basically everything pretty clearly, right? So there's not really a huge change of values, right? So in this time of the Baroque, that's going to change. We're going to see an experimentation, an exploration of values as well. And the last thing that is also tied to a lot of these elements is vivid realism, and naturalism more than realism. We're going to see things as we expect them, right? Like this idea of what flesh looks like, what sweat looks like, all of these things that we experience in life, we're gonna artists try to replicate them in canvas. So vivid naturalism and realism. Now, as I was mentioning before, right, when I started talking about the Baroque, part of the transition into new ways of portraying aesthetics has to do with what's going on at this period of time. So the religion, not the religion, the church is making, it's tightening up its grip, and one of the things that they're trying to do is going to reaffirm the sacraments. So this time period is called the Counter-Reformation in the Catholic Church, and like I mentioned earlier, it's a very harsh period where a lot of people died. Anyways, during this Counter-Reformation, and we're looking at the reaffirmation of the sacraments, and if you're a Catholic, you know what that means, but also the glorification of the saints. The saints are those who are martyrs in some ways. They died on behalf of us for one reason or another, or if they didn't die, they sacrificed in some way or another for our well-being. And then last but not least, in regards to aesthetic qualities, all of these things are being applied so that we can pray better, so we can fulfill all these things that the religion, that the church is trying us to do, right? So art in general is being created for all of those things, to help us remember the saints, to help us reaffirm the sacraments, and also last but not least, help us pray. And this will make sense in just a second. Now, unfortunately, during this time period, because of the Counter-Reformation, because of a change of feel on how things have been working, right? And right before the 1600s, Pope Paul IV decided that nudity was no longer welcome in so many ways, especially male nudity. So in this period, he created what is called the Great Castration, meaning every public sculpture or imagery that had a male phallus was either covered or was amputated. So throughout Europe, you'll see a lot of artworks that are from the Renaissance, from the Baroque, and even further back into time, who all the male phalluses were completely chopped off or covered, as I just mentioned. So pretty sad. Thankfully for David, Michelangelo's David was part of a private collection, and he was saved from that. So here is a very iconic image of the Baroque. This is what the Baroque looked like. The Baroque was very much about drama. Look at, the emotion that this figure is portraying here, as well as the elements attached to drama, meaning, for example, the value, how dark everything looks. We do not know what's back there. What's behind the shadows? What's going on in the dark that we don't see? All of those elements are there to create drama. Additionally, this chiaroscuro, the dark and the light, this sharp transition allows us to focus on the things that are the most essential. It makes us focus on the things that we need to pay attention to. So in this case, we have the saint, and then we also have the horse, which is part of the story, etc., etc. All of these elements there, we are made to focus on those elements and those elements only. Now, this kind of paintings were fairly large. Okay, they were fairly large. And imagine if you were going to church and this beautiful painting is in front of you and you wanted to pray to the saint. Well, this is the part that was that artworks were made in this way, and it was meant for you to help you pray. So imagine if this object's in front of you, like I was just mentioning, and you're thinking about the saint and the suffering of the saint, and you're praying for forgiveness, or you're praying for her health, or you're praying for whatever it is, and this image in front of you kind of reminds you, makes you pray even harder for whatever you're praying for. So that was part of it. This kind of iconic imagery from the Baroque, and a lot of the most recognizable artworks from this time period came from this specific painter, and this is Caravaggio. If you guys have been to the Kimball, we have a couple of Caravaggios here, especially the Car Sharp is one of Caravaggio's paintings. And unfortunately, the art show that is currently in the Kimball, it is very much this time period, the Baroque. And but anyways, so if we're able to go back to regular life, and that show is still available, Body and Soul, I think it's called. Oh, I forget the name of it. Anyways, if you're able to go back and we're able to see these artworks, make sure you go, because there's more than one of Caravaggio's works. Here's another very good example of Baroque painting. Same elements. So we have here a lot of dark areas, a lot of chiaroscuro. There's a lot of storytelling here, and also drama, right? So we definitely have, I don't know if you can see, but this is the head of Holofernes. And then we have the story of the two ladies who beheaded him, right? Beautiful painting, same elements, same elements. So we have very strong changes in light to dark, so the values. We have very strong changes of depth, so we can see everything basically in one single painting, etc. Now this one is by a female artist, Artemisa Gentileschi. She is a very iconic painter from this time period as well. And once again, if we're able to go back to the Kimball currently, that show has a couple of her paintings. I would suggest you take a look at her work. You see her kind of overall paintings, and you'll see kind of her relationship to the male gender. There's some interesting, I would say, feministic tendencies in a lot of her paintings, which are pretty interesting to look at. So if you can, take a look at her work just in general, and a lot of her kind of most recognized paintings. Additionally, in this time period, we have a very well recognized sculptor. His name is Bernini. Now, if this name sounds a little bit familiar, it's because if you've either read or seen the movies of the Da Vinci Code, or the books of the Da Vinci Code, Bernini is a very iconic part of a very important part of one of the books. Anyways, he is the most recognized sculptor of this period. His works are all over Europe, especially Rome, Florence, Vienna, Venice, all of this kind of southern Renaissance area. You're going to find a lot of Bernini sculptures. He was very prolific. Now, one of the things to think about is that artists like himself did not do all the artwork themselves. They had massive groups of understudies, people who would learn the craft from him, and they would this artisans or this artist in training would come in and carve most of the sculptures under his tutorage. And then what he would do is he'll come back and do details, right? He will do the faces, he will do the hands, he will do all the final details that made a Bernini sculpture a Bernini sculpture. Now, as you see this sculpture right here, this is another David. Oops. This is another David. So this is the third David we've seen. However, this David obviously is much different than the other ones. So if we look at all three of the Davids, right, you can see the evolution here from from, this is Donatello's David, then we have Michelangelo's David, and now we have here Bernini's David. Very, very different. Normally in class I would ask you guys to, kind of talk about the similarities and the differences between all three of them. One of the most striking differences that you can see right off the bat is the fact of the age. So we have a very young David here, then we have a much more adult one, but we have here a very, very much more mature David. Still young, still following a lot of those aesthetic ideals of Greece, still somewhat part of that Renaissance concept, but nevertheless just a little bit more mature, much more sure of who he is. And remember that David here, in all three cases, it is a symbol of Florence and also a symbol of the Renaissance. Now, other similarities, so as I mentioned before, we have the Greek ideals of youth. He's in very, very good physical shape. What else? We also have the fact that he's made out of marble. In this case, the marble used for this specific sculpture is not as pure as the one for David, but nevertheless, it is white marble. It is not as large as this David right here. It's much more in the scale of actually in between the two of them, almost kind of human size. And another thing that is really important to understand, and is obvious here, what creates the division between what we can recognize as Renaissance versus Baroque is the fact that he's covered. So in this case, we have nude sculptures which glorify, our similitude to God in some ways, as is said in the Bible, right? We're created in the image of God. In this case, it is different. We need to be more prude, conservative, and so forth and so on. So now he is covered. So you can definitely see the different and approaches between the Renaissance versus the Baroque. Lastly, but also very, very important to note is that here, once again, we have Greek ideals in which keeping calm, your emotions, all of those elements were part of this era, right? And here, emotions are very important, right? The drama and the emotions are really much a part of the aesthetics of this time period. We wanted to feel what David was feeling, right? We wanted to see what he was, the emotion, the power behind what allowed him to kill Goliath, right? So we wanted to make sure we portrayed that in the sculpture. So it's this beautiful transition between, the Renaissance and the Baroque, this evolution. Now, one of the most beautiful things I think historically to see in our history is this echoing of history, especially with this time period that looked back at Greece, right? So if we look back at Greece, as I mentioned when we're talking about Greek history, this had already happened before in Greece. Basically exactly the same evolution, and it's really interesting to see it back to back. So here we have the three Davids, an evolution between, just an idealistic imagery of David here. Then we have a David that we can possibly see, feel. There's something much more than just the sculpture, than the imagery. There's something that allows us to interact better with the sculpture. And last but not least, full of emotion, full of body, full of soul, and so forth and so on. Here we can see that with Greece, we had exactly the same thing. The same kind of evolution in Greece, when we have just the basic ideals, the feel that the human body is in movement, to create a more beautiful sculpture, to get it closer to humanity. And then last but not least, the expression, the change, in order to show the emotion to tell the story. So this is one of those beautiful comparisons. This is the echoing of history, and there's thousand plus years of difference between this evolution and then the evolution between the Renaissance and the Baroque. Here's another beautiful example, and very iconic example of Bernini sculptures. The exquisiteness of the way he portrayed marble to show emotion, or not portrayed, but by carved marble to showcase emotion. It is what makes Bernini sculptures so iconic and so much part of the Baroque. This level of emotion, this level of attention to detail and the emotion between everything of the sculpture is definitely Baroque. Oops, sorry about that, guys. The Baroque also had other very iconic artists. One of the other artists who are very much part of the Baroque and is also, I mean, I hate to use the word iconic so much, but it really is in this case, is Rubens. Now Rubens, excuse me guys, Rubens had a very idealistic approach to the human body. So still elements from the Renaissance, this concepts that were driven from Greece, right? So we have idealism, you know, youth and so forth and so on, all those elements. So if you look at here, if you look at every single element here, whether it's the trees, whether it's the older gentleman, whether it is Jesus, it doesn't matter who it is here, every single one of them is idealistically portrayed. Look at those bodies. It looks like every single one of them will have been you know, using steroids. All of them have been going to the gym. This kind of idealistic musculature bodies, and they are part of Rubens' aesthetic in so many ways. I strongly suggest you take a look at his work. Normally at this point I would actually pull up a browser and we will look at several of his paintings so you can see what I'm talking about. Unfortunately I can't with this recording system. But anyways, if you'd like to and take a look at his works, everything is completely idealized, from the way that the hair curls on the dogs to the way the hair flows with the horses, the musculature of the animals, the curvature of the women, everything in his paintings were idealized, and I would say even exaggerated past idealization, in which is very, very iconic and very. As soon as you see a painting by Rubens, you know it's Rubens. It's almost automatic. It's pretty interesting. Another artist, very well recognized from the Baroque, it's Velázquez. So Velázquez it's a pretty interesting story. Velázquez himself, very devout Catholic, and some of the strongest Catholic and rulers, Catholic groups, knights, guidelines. I mean, some of the strongest points of the church during this time period was Spain and Portugal. I mean, the Spanish Inquisition is part of this time period. They were very, very much attached to the church. So out of all Europe, when we talk about the Reformation, Spain in particular was brutal, very brutal. Velázquez was a knight for the church, and he was very proud of being a knight. However, he also had a set of skills for painting. He was also a pretty good artist, and the king had him as their royal painter. He was the one person that would paint the portraiture of the royal family. It's not something that Velázquez liked too much. He did it because he was basically appointed to do so, but not something he wanted to do. He would have much rather be out there, you know, being a knight and fighting in the name of God. So one of the paintings that he created was this specific painting. It's called Las Meninas, and it is a very different painting for everything that's happening in the Baroque right now. And contemporarily, we see this painting and we see a lot of elements in this painting that are beyond what the Baroque was. It's actually much more contemporary in style than a lot of the Baroque paintings. So it's very modernistic for that time period. Anyways, some of the things I wanted to point out is that this is, in some ways, the a painting of the royal family. But it's not a regular painting, obviously. It's not just the family being, standing side by side and so forth and so on, right? Instead, it is more a snapshot of kind of the reality of of this moment. So it is very much a realistic painting. It's a snapshot of what's going on right there. And one of the cool things about this painting is that this main subject matter it's not this main subject matter that is supposed to be for the painting. So this painting is a painting of the royal family. So you would think that the most important elements of the royal family portrait would be the royal family. And in some way they are, and they're there, but it's hidden behind layers of perception, meaning on the way we look at things, right? So we are perceiving this as if he is painting this very specific painting about the subject matter, which is the king and the queen. Well, obviously that is not the painting, right? This is the painting. This painting that he's painting here, quote unquote, it never existed, right? That painting doesn't exist. What exists is the one you're looking at. Anyways, so the main subject matter is going to be the royal family. So where is the king and the queen if they are the central points of attention? Now, if you notice, these are all paintings right here, right? However, this is something that kind of shines up a little bit, right? That's actually a mirror. And you can see here the king and the queen. And they're really tiny. They're really, really small. However, in some ways, they are not small because they are where we're sitting, which is kind of odd in itself, but at the same time is the main subject matter in this painting that he's painting that it doesn't exist. So it's really interesting, this kind of switch of things. Another things that are really interesting is that when he's discussing this royal family through painting, through this image, through this artwork, you can see that he's also talking about all of the other people that are that surrounds the royal family. Who is the royal family in some ways. So you can see, for example, in the center of it all, and the reason why it's called as meninas, we have here the little princess, right? So we have a little princess here that is, dressed from head to toe, right? And we have two little girls, helping her out, ladies in waiting, helping out, serving her hand and foot. So, what would you say of a little girl, excuse me, that would have everything of that, right? Who is the center of attention. Yeah, you could say that, she might be slightly spoiled. And in this case, who is the center of attention? Who is the center of the royal family, right? If we're talking about this as a royal portrait, she is the center of the royal family. She is the precious jewel. She is the one to take care of. And of course, I take care of everybody, but you know what I mean. Like, care a lot and pay a lot of attention to her. It's more what I should say. Also, we have here, obviously, we do have these two individuals who are part of the church, right? They're part of it. And one of the things that's interesting is that they're talking back here. They're whispering. There's some kind of secrecy going on of some sorts, talking behind somebody's back, not in a mean way, but whisperings that happen, and he's kind of mentioning that very loosely here through this portrait. Another person here on the back, here's the person that takes care of the king and the queen. There's two ways so you can see it. Some people see in a positive light where he's kind of keeping an eye on everybody, making sure everybody's all right, or the opposite, just nosing to see what's going on, keeping tracks of things in a much more negative way. So either way, we have this individual here who is checking up on what's going on in the room. The last couple of people or individuals here or figures I'm going to point out is going to be the little prince, right? He's a little prince. And if you think about a dog. A dog is fidelity. A dog is companionship. All of the things that we consider a dog. And as a little boy, look what he's doing. He's stepping on him. Is waking him up. Not very nice. So kind of in the same realm as with his little sister, he's giving us some much more the lack of niceties of the little prince. There's an animal that is just sleeping. So giving those elements there. And last but not least, the other person I'm going to talk about is going to be this little person here. And as you can see, she is probably the only one is portrayed in a very good light. She has her rosary. She is not paying attention to the queen and king. She is doing her job as the person who takes care of the kids. She is the only one in the whole painting that is being portrayed in a very kind, nice manner. So a lot of intrigue in this painting. A lot of things happen in this painting, and that's one of the many reasons why this painting is such an iconic painting from the Baroque, especially when it comes to Velázquez. Another Baroque artist, and you can definitely see the Baroque style here with a lot of the chiaroscuro, the darks, values, and so forth, is going to be Rembrandt. Rembrandt is a painter with very loose brush strokes, very soft, very light with the paint. Not so much the color, but light as, like I said, the brush strokes in general. So in this case, I wanted to point out a couple of things. There's this painting by Rembrandt and then this other painting by a different Baroque artist as well. And this one is by Vermeer. Now Vermeer we've seen before, right? We talked about the pigments and how expensive the pigments were. So here we have this Baroque painting that continues to follow some of the Baroque ideals. However, it is different in some ways on this other portrayal of the Baroque. Now, they're both Baroque, but they're different, obviously, right? So, what are the things here that in both cases makes them Baroque? Well, or what are some of the differences or similarities? One of the difference you see right off the bat is the fact that it's lighter here, right? It's bright, while this is dark. Right? Light and dark. Well, this is still the Baroque. We still have a very strong sense of values. Look, this is dark values and so forth, and you have bright values. But instead of, it's kind of the opposite, right? So in here we have light values with very little dark values, and here's the opposite. We have very dark values with very light values. So kind of contrasting. Now, why would that be the case? What is one of what? Well, before I go into that, let's talk about another thing. What's the subject matter, for example? The subject matter here is a religious story from the Bible. So it's a return of the prodigal son. Here, there's no religious content, right? No religious, just the lady, pouring down the milk, getting ready for breakfast or whatever, right? So the fact that this is bright light, right, and that is a non-religious artwork, and that it is a religious artwork and it's fairly dark, what can those elements tell us about the difference between those two artworks? Hopefully you are thinking money. Hopefully you're thinking about the ability to paint with these colors, because that's the reason. If you have a room that is bright, right, then you can see all the colors of the room, right? You can see the bright blues, you can see the bright greens, you can see all of those elements. So if you're an artist who have the ability to acquire really expensive paints, then you can paint the Baroque and you can paint the values really bright because you do have access to the very expensive pigments. Here, on the other hand, we don't. Right? So we have here a painter that might not have access to the same quality or the same level of materials. Very dark. As you can see, we only have reds, browns, and yellows, which are probably the least expensive of the pigments out there. And this one is a painting that was most likely paid for, and somebody actually paid to get this painting done. While in this case was much more leisure, right? So Vermeer was a self-made merchant. He painted at his own leisure. He painted what he needed, what he wanted. I mean, while here with Rembrandt, he wasn't, right? So you can see those two differences from the Baroque. They're both very Baroque, but obviously there's some differences between them. Now this is really interesting. So as we continue working with the Baroque, we continue moving forward in time. This is something that becomes kind of a fad, and it is the ability for people to travel around Europe. It's much easier. You're able to go from one city to another. You're able to acquire fruits and candies and all kinds of different things from around Europe altogether. And you were measured as a person of wealth depending on the things that you were able to acquire, to hold, to consume, etc. Right? So if you have consumables, things that you want, let's say you wanted, treats from, Spain or from this other country or this other place, right? And you got them, right? And then you consume them, they're gone. So how can you keep a visual track of the things that you want to have at your house all the time? Well, you can paint them, right? So this kind of paintings you see in a lot of museums that tend to be kind of boring, okay, are just ways for people to show through art the things that they want, right? So I want this beautiful candies, and I want this, and I want that. So they would have their artists, paint these elements, and then you can hang this on your dining room or whatever else. And those were not the only things that were painted. There were flowers, and then also you will see a lot of game, meaning birds or animals who were part of going out hunting, those kind of things. So you'll see a lot of those things. So this kind of paintings were just snapshots of what people wanted, right? This right here is the predecessor, the great grandparent in artistic wise of this. Bottom line, this and this are basically the same kind of art. This is what people wanted back then. This is what was popular. This is what was pop in the 1600s, 1627 to be specific with this one. So this is the pop of 1627. This is what people wanted to know, wanted to own, wanted to have. Now, if we move forward in time, this is how these artworks are important nowadays, because it's exactly the same thing, right? This is what people want to have in their houses. The latest vacuum cleaner. I mean, I own a Dyson. I bet a lot of you and your parents own Dysons, right? But let's not stop with that. Everybody wants the phone. Everybody wants this. Everybody wants that, right? But instead of painting them, in this case, we have an artist who is basically giving us the same thing, but in a sculptural form, right? So this is the importance. This is the interesting thing about pop art. This is the original pop art, and this is contemporary pop art. Not because it's it pops, but because it's popular. Because it is the things that right now people wanted to have and were popular, and the same thing right here. These are the things that people want to have and are popular. Hopefully you find this interesting. Now, as we continue talking about the Baroque, now towards the end of the Baroque, the want, the exactly what we're just talking about, this necessity to showcase your wealth through the things you own, was continuing to grow. The more you can showcase your wealth through visual means that people can recognize, obviously the more powerful you were. And the epitome of power and epitome of this show of wealth through artistic means, through the things, through the visuals, yeah, through having and to owning and through pop in so many different ways, is this era towards the end of the Baroque. Now, this specific building, it's Versailles, right outside of Paris, and it is an outstanding, amazing building, full of decorations, full of very expensive elements. One of the elements in this room that are really interesting is that mirrors this large did not existed. Mirrors that large were invented specifically during this time period, specifically and only for this room. So this is called the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. And this side, obviously, you have the mirrors, but on this side, outside, you're going to have the gardens. And this is what the gardens look like. Now, the Hall of Mirrors is actually this area right here, right there. That's what the Hall of Mirrors is. So if I go back for a second, right, it's that right there. The show of power through visual means. The more you show that you have, the more powerful you are. And imagine you being a peasant or you being from another country that is not as wealthy, walking through those palaces, showcasing your wealth through sculptures and through, decorated ceilings and so forth and so on. Had to have been very impressive, and it still is nowadays. It still is impressive. So, with this sense of want and grandeur and things over the top, okay, we get to an era of the Baroque, which is called the Rococo. So just like with Romanesque and Gothic, which one is part of the other, same thing here. Rococo is part of the Baroque. It's just the very end of the Baroque. It's where we have this pop, this need of want and showcase power through visual means that is just way over the top. Okay, so as I mentioned, it is part of the Baroque. It's known for very, very heavy decorations. The decorations were extravagant and frivolous, so you'll see a lot of gold, you'll see a lot of overly ornate furniture, heavy furniture, things of this nature, right? Now, one of the most clear ways to see the difference between just kind of the regular Baroque into the Rococo is going to be a color scheme. So think Marie Antoinette, right? So you have very beigey blues, beigey pinks, and all these other colors that are much more subdued. So like this blue and so forth and so on, right? All these very toned down colors, pastels, right? Those are very much the Rococo. The Baroque is a lot more bright, colorful. The Rococo is a little more tame, but with a lot of gold. So you have all these elements with gold. Another thing that you're going to see with the Rococo. Sorry, guys. Give me a second. Eventually, this was going to happen with one of the classes. Anyways. So what was I? Okay, so we're talking about the gold decorations. So another thing is this essence, this focus also on things that are romantic and in regards to love, relationship, those kind of romantic kind of contexts, right? So you're going to see a lot of Aphrodites, a lot of love stories, but also the use of cupids and putti, and you're going to see them all over the place. So a lot of those little angelic type of subject matter. And last but not least, a lot of things that you will see as well is that a lot of these elements here are vine-like. So plants become an element of inspiration. So vines, plants, those kind of elements. Now, if you think about chandeliers, chandeliers tend to look like branches, and the ends of the branches have little dewdrops, right? Little water dripping down. So that's what the chandeliers in so many cases are just mimicry of nature as well. Now, this era was so impressive in culture, right? Regarding that what you show was basically the things that you own gave a feel of how wealthy you were. That way of thinking has remained for a long period of time, especially with this kind of decoration. So think about, your grandparents or your family, or even, look at books of decoration. Think about what the furniture that people sometimes acquire that says, I want this because that is the best, most beautiful, that exists. And especially for those of us who are Latin, our grandparents have this massive, couches with this beautiful carved decorative, backings, or a chest of drawers with all kinds of this wood carving. And a lot of our culture still is grounded on this concept of the Rococo, this specific style of decoration, of embellishment, of approach of visual aesthetics is very much connected with wealth, and with kind of this sense of being well off and so forth. So anyways, keep that in mind. Another element that is very important from this time period, as you're thinking about this idea of extravaganza, and over the top, is also how people interacted. So we have a time where theatrics, which is part of art, right, overflowed beyond just the theater walls. So not only was the world decorated with this kind of over the top artistic, not artistic, but aesthetics and decoration, all those things, but also the theater. So this is the time where your vestures were very much theatrical. So you had big wigs, and you had big clothing with a lot of things attached to them. You had men wear makeup, and also the way you acted, right? So this kind of courtship music, festivities, all of those things. Bowing. It was one of those things that's very much theatrical. Sitting down for a 10-course meal in which each plate is brought in with over decoration, and the way that it's presented and all of those things. That is part of the theatrics, part of this time period. Everything was over the top. And once again, if you think about our culture, if we think about things that we still consider to be kind of for the rich, for those who made it, a lot of those elements are still present today. Anyways, think also music in this case, right? So this is when we're having what we consider the classical period of music, or what we consider to be classical anyway. So Beethoven and this massive orchestras, right? So it was no longer the trio or the piano, but rather this grouping of music, or instruments, in order to create music. So it was not just a small, but over the top, extravagant. And another thing that makes it very much sense in this whole period is going to be opera. Opera is also part of this period. So over the top, overly done, and so forth and so on. So the Rococo is definitely about extravaganza. So here is the Rococo, right? As I was mentioning earlier, this sense of kind of love and romance, and everything being wonderful, great life, right? So this beautiful painting right here where everything is fluffy, it seems to be soft. The plants are soft, and we have angels and cupids, and then we have the two lovers, and the accident on the happy accident on the swing with the shoe going away. It's just, everything is just so wonderful. Everything is just great, right? Everything is just peaceful, and it's very romantic. But let's be realistic, right? Who is the ones who are having fun? Who are the ones who have the luxury of playing around and being frivolous and enjoying this extravaganza? it's not this John Doe person, right? Or it's not just your regular peasant. It's only those with money, right? And guess what happened during this time period? Guess what happened? Well, pretty soon, first in 1776, the American Revolution happened, but in 1789, right after the Americans won the revolution, the French no longer can allow those with money to continue to just live this frivolous life, so that brought in the French Revolution. And with the French Revolution, we have a sharp end to the era of the Baroque and the Rococo.